tourists come to the northeast of Brazil by way of Rio de Janeiro and Salvador in search of white beaches, warm waves and lithe brown bodies. 500 years ago, European adventurers came to Brazil by sea. They sailed down the northeast coast, creeping into its estuaries to escape Atlantic storms and sea fights with their rivals for the spoils of the New World. In the safety of the river mouths, they set up trading posts, where they swapped steel axe heads for fresh food and the favors of Indian women. Soon the Europeans realized that there were fortunes to be made by the cultivation of sugar cane, and so they brought to the Nordeste of Brazil horses, oxen, and slaves. Out of the sugar profits, the Portuguese ruling class built itself pretty towns like Penedo, full of churches with elaborate barley sugar facades. There's no regular transport on the river. The craft at the quay are mainly ferries that bring the workers from the rice polders and their families to town. To go upriver, I've got to find one of the handful of old canoas that struggle upstream by sail to carry cargo to the inland towns.
Senhor! Senhor! Viaje para apropriar? Apropriar? Não.
Passa direto.
Direto onde? Não, não vá. Vá ou não vá?
Pão de açúcar somente. Onde o
A pão de açúcar mais meio, é?
É.
Quanto custa a viagem? 200, 300.
Tudo.
Oh. If you can't do that, how am I going to do that? All right. Alternative route. Não banhar, é? Mas tem banheiro? Tu essa embarcação tem banheiro?
Não.
Oh dear. Oh, manage somehow. So, die. Now the question is, do I take off my shoes or do I use the bucket to clink? Sim, banheiro como? Quase?
Following the route taken by the Indians when, terrified of slavery, they were driven away from the fertile coastal plain into the inhospitable interior. Their places were taken by Africans who were forced by the bludgeon to work 6 days a week for the master and the other day on growing food for themselves. The most desperate fled after the Indians up the Rio Sao into the arid bushland called the Sertão. Our boat belongs to a merchant who uses it to bring supplies of fruit and vegetables to sell in the market at Pão de Açúcar, 150 kilometers upstream. The men earn 16,000 cruzeiros a month. That's about 15 pounds. And they make the journey once a week.
Quantas vezes se faz a viagem? Para chegar a Penedo?
É 2 descendo e 2 subindo.
It's hard enough for me to understand Brazilian Portuguese when it is clearly spoken. In the Nordeste, it's a real struggle. People chew sugarcane, and dentists charge many times these workers' monthly wage. The result is that most people lack most of their teeth.
Não, aí não tem.
Depende do vento.
Depende do vento. O vento é quem mata, né? Aí
Quando o vento termina, ninguém encosta, vai dormir.
Morre a tua vaca?
Morre, acabou.
Sim.
para, amarra.
Amarra ela, arreia o ferro lá fora e deixa ela no meio do rio. Assim.
Ah.
Moreover, my friends, the crew of the canoa, are not particularly forthcoming. Most sailors think that a woman on board's bad luck, and Brazilians are no exception. I already knew that there were no toilet facilities on the boat, but I didn't dream they wouldn't offer me food or drink. When the wind fell and the sails flapped idly, the canoa began to drift downstream. From all points of view, it seemed a good idea to do what all the rich people do in the roadless Nordeste, to take to the air. The poor stay put until drought or destitution forces them to leave their small farms called hostas. Then they pack their worldly goods in a cardboard suitcase and walk to town. Pão de Açúcar is as far as the boats can go. Upstream, the rapids begin. As we fly over this scarp, we enter the dry heartland of the São Francisco, the Sertão. The great river passes through the dryness like a self-contained aqueduct. Almost all the water it carries was picked up 2,000 kilometers upstream. The pent-up energy of the rejuvenated river cries out for exploitation on the grand scale. In 1955, the federal government of Brazil embarked on a massive development project, a system of 6 generating stations, 4 of them to be built at Paulo Afonso. Harnessed, the São Francisco provides power for 5 states, to the great delight of the multinationals who are thus able to exploit a vast pool of cheap labor. 400 kilometers upstream, at the twin towns of Petrolina and Juazeiro, the São Francisco becomes navigable again. That's where I'm to meet the star of the show. She's a paddle steamer built by James Reese & Sons of Pittsburgh in 1913, acquired in pieces by the São Francisco Navigation Company in 1930, and reassembled on the banks of the river. She's practically in pieces again. There used to be a fleet of paddle steamers regularly plying the river, but now it seems that only this one, called after the river, the São Francisco, is left. She's to travel upstream to Pirapora, where she'll become a tourist attraction, making day trips. Nowadays, no tourist boat would be complete without its cahanca, its figurehead. Grotesquely carved figureheads used to be seen occasionally on the cargo boats that plied the river until about 1940. Now, hundreds of thousands of them, some small enough to fit on pencils, others huge, are whittled out of unseasoned wood, daubed with red, black and white lacquer, and sold in every gift shop in Brazil. Juazeiro used to be an elegant town with tree-shaded quays and stone slipways where the river craft were tethered. But as the river's importance has declined, Juazeiro has declined, even though its population has been swelled by hundreds of thousands of refugees, invasores da terra. Grandiose schemes for development have crumbled. The hovels of the poor cluster in the lee of abandoned factories and highways. Here in the centre, the open drains swarm with maggots. Street cleaning is left to the dogs and pigs.
Tá filmando o Chico Seu João aqui, ó.
¿Cómo se llama?
Jaca.
Jaque. ¿Es que se come?
Como? Bago. Ih, guri.
Come on. Gostoso, sì. What are you doing there?
The fruit hasn't been improved by the journey over bumpy roads fermenting in the heat. Even so, the children, most of whom still live on the old slave diet of manioc and dried meat, eye it with desire.
Como se chama esse? Abacate, sim. Esse? Chuchu. Chuchu.
Everywhere in the Nordeste there are children, hordes of them. No place is ever barred to them, no voice or hand is ever raised against them. Most of the boys of this age are working or looking for work. The people say that the free schools are useless. Certainly school seems quite irrelevant to the 8-year-old male population of Juazeiro. Far more important than learning to read is the acquisition of a wheelbarrow, a tangible capital asset. To protect it from thievery, a tired boy will sleep in it.
E tem una roba per la garganta inflammata?
If school is irrelevant, doctors are irrelevant too. Free medicine exists only in theory. Most people do what I'm doing here. They medicate themselves from a pharmacopoeia made up from Indian law and muddled European memories. Those who do so do themselves less harm than the others who buy over-the-counter antibiotics.
Look at this. Ruta graviolen. Como? Arruda.
Arruda,
Você faz chá?
Chá,
Para que dor?
Esse aí serve pra gripe, pra meba, pra tudo.
Para gripe.
pra
Ruta
meba,
para gripe.
Arruda.
E não é vermifugo. Não.
Dá pra fazer o chá. É bom, é cheiroso. Cheiroso.
É potente.
The people of the Nordeste are used to making do with next to nothing. Frugality is a part of the dignity of the lifestyle of those who resist the lure of the chaotic river towns and cling to the calm of the vast hinterland, the Caatinga. They cultivate their small plots when the scanty rains permit and carefully husband their meagre produce. Some earn a little cash from craft activities, but where cajanca carving is relatively lucrative, the female craft of lace making is cruelly underpaid.
E como se ganha disso? Metro disso, quanto vale?
Esse aqui eu estou fazendo por 500. 500 um metro.
500, porque é alto? Sim.
Por 1 metro.
E quantas horas necessita para fazer metro disto?
Na
Trabalho contínuo.
Na semana, se fizer mais de metro é pouco. 1 semana.
São 500 cruzeiros a semana? Oh.
Eu não sei se ganho. Se fizer. Se não fizer, não ganha não. Ontem mesmo eu não fiz. Ontem eu não fiz não. Ontem eu fui me ocupar no trabalho.
How much longer can the sisters keep their only asset, the cool and spacious house their forefathers built for them?
Mamãe gosta muito dessa casa, tanto elegante.
Aqui gasta muito porque são quantas cômodos? 7 cômodos. Porque aqui dentro são 4, ali fora 3.
The floor of the house is chão batido, swept and patterned silver sand. But the sisters don't cling to the traditional style for aesthetic reasons.
A gente cimentar não. Tá muito caro. Tá muito caro o cimento.
They were so charming and cheerful that I didn't realize at once how hard life was for them. The mound of stones they used to stretch drying linen on was much larger than usual, but I didn't like to ask if they supplemented their lace making by taking in washing. At last the São Francisco was ready, or as ready as she ever would be. The Nordeste equivalent of the man on the Clapham omnibus is the 8-year-old owner of one T-shirt and one pair of shorts. As we make our monumental way upriver, people stop work and gaze at us with something not unlike wonder. The captain says the journey will take 10 days, God willing.
Claustrophobes don't need mosquito net. I'm probably going to suffocate with it in my mouth like a baby left in an unattended vehicle. I'll be buried without any mosquito. I don't think this is going to work. Ouch! I just tore it.
The food is good and plentiful, mainly meat and starch. The service is exquisite. The first-class dining room is dominated by a rather bituminous copy of a Murillo painting. I am not, however, invited to sit at the captain's table.
Obrigada.
Things are livelier below decks, where you only get a knife or a fork if you brought one yourself.
Oh, papai,
Vem sorriso, vem freguês, de passagem pela caixa, dá uma baixa no português.
The Brazilian name for paddle steamer is gaiola, or bird cage. To me, she looks rather like Miss Havisham's wedding cake from Great Expectations. Across the Rio Sao Francisco, 50 kilometers upstream from Petrolina Juazeiro, lies the barrage of Sobradinho. Behind it stretches the largest man-made lake in the world. The old gaiola flounces into the lock, and we all gape at a virtuoso display of modern technology for which the World Bank will never be paid. The total cost of the San Francisco hydroelectric scheme is somewhere in excess of $1,008 billion. The cheap electricity that it paid for is sold dear by state and local authorities. The barrage at Sobradinho was never intended to be as high or as long as it finally became. Foreign advisors warned that the level of the river would be raised as far upstream as Bom Jesus da Lapa, but the Brazilians went ahead anyway. The prospect of building the largest reservoir in the world was too exciting to pass up. Out we sail, away from the bright glare of modern technology into the mysterious dark. turned loose on a watery desert. The harsh dawn showed a vast expanse of empty water, too shallow to have a colour of its own and too choppy to reflect the sky. For the people below decks, monotony was not a problem. And nobody was weeping for the towns of Remanso and Saint-Ossé that went under as the lake was filled.
A onça da cameleira é valente, é brigadeira. Se ela bota em mim, sou homem, tenho coragem. Pego ela na peixe, oh, pego ela na peixe, oh, pego ela na peixe. Nazareia, meu bem, Nazareia, ai, 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 menina, tu não.
These are the only monuments to Remanso. The Gaiola with its shallow draft now sails right over the old towns. The townsfolk have been rehoused in New Remanso and New Saint-Ossé, which have clean water and electricity, although no work. The farmers have not fared so well.
Aqui no doutor, como Remanso velho, esses outros lugares tudo da beira do rio, ele indenizou até aqui. O marreco, até aqui.
This old lady has been waiting for months to get compensation for her land. Unlike many small farmers, she has documents to prove her ownership. Even so, payments to lawyers and inflation will probably absorb all the money.
Deus que paga, mas está muito difícil, só com muito interesse. Diz que eles pagam, outros diz que não pagam. A gente não pode obrigar eles.
Her optimism is part of the Nordestino way of coping with the unbearable.
Tenho sempre esperança.
Eles me dão, não sei se vai sair, né? Agora a esperança eles me dão, porque o homem que levou a escritura é doutor da chefe, ele sabe de tudo, do problema, né? Da fazenda, de tudo, que meu marido não estava era com ele, mas ele era vaqueiro da sogra dele. E esse problema todo ele sabe.
The people had seen the river rise before. When the lake began to fill, they simply couldn't understand that this time the waters wouldn't subside for them to plant their corn and beans and manioc. The lake grew and grew, swallowing farm and ranch land until it covered rather more than 4,000 square kilometers. The São Francisco Hydroelectric Company, known as CHESFI, says quite correctly that it is not a philanthropic institution. Its job is to produce cheap hydroelectricity. The CHESFI towns themselves are showplaces, but only those who could survive the turmoil of the inundation ever got to live in them.
My parish has got 60 different towns in it, spread over an area of 100 by 150 miles. And there's places where you can go 30 and 40 miles without seeing any settlement, any house.
Father Mark is the parish priest of Saint-Ossé.
Tell me something, Father. How does somebody from the Middle West, where are you from?
I'm from Iowa. I wrote the bishop. The bishop said, come on down, except I can't pay you a salary. I can't help you with your airplane expenses.
And when was that?
This was in 1969.
It's not easy to decide what Father Mark likes best about being a Nordestino parish priest, the daredevil flying or the religious duties. In all his roles he seems to be something of a larrikin, but there is a method in his wild ways.
The only other airplane that's ever landed here crashed on takeoff.
As we we bounced down into one of his far-flung parishes, we encountered a pig about to cross the runway.
Now, it's a good thing she didn't say foremost, Ted.
Yeah, that's why I shut the engine off so we wouldn't have chopped ham, chopped meat.
With 60 parishes in one, Father Mark can hardly expect to visit any more than once or twice a year. So a ciborium full of consecrated hosts is left to be distributed by a lay worker.
Ela mesmo. Aqui, ó. Olha. Quantas crianças que você tem agora?
There's not much emphasis on confession, or for that matter on dogma. It's more important to get the folks married, 3 couples in this case, and the kids baptized.
Na alegria e na tristeza. Na saúde e na doença. Amando-te, respeitando-te.
The sermon has more to do with fashionable American theories of interpersonal relationships than with Catholic doctrine. When Father Mark insisted that the couples kiss in his presence, and that of the whole village, they almost died of embarrassment.
Tem aliança? Quem que vê a aliança? Deus abençoe essa aliança.
Fewer than 5% of the people in Father Mark's parish have been baptized. Most children are born in informal unions. The legacy of slavery dies hard. The African and Indian systems of social organization were smashed long ago, and the church offers nothing in replacement, until now, 3 centuries too late. Father Mark puts a great deal of time and energy and money into running his model farm. It seems almost more important for him to make a success of the application of modern farming techniques than to preach the gospel.
Do you think the dam is a good thing for the people of this area?
The move itself was a disaster, a calamity. Many people lost a great deal, including our own move. But the result after several years, I would have to say, is 1,000% in front of what it ever was before the move. When I came here, there was a store, the biggest store in town had exactly 8 items. And now there'd be several thousand items in the normal store.
But have the people got the money, the cash, to pay for these things?
When I came here, there wasn't even enough cash flowing in town to have a market where they sold the vegetables. And now there's considerable cash in town, part of it coming from the local production.
Did nobody leave? Didn't people go to the cities when this
A
whole
lot of people
upheaval
went to
happened?
the cities, and many of those came back down here. Some people didn't make a go of it because when they lived by the river, they fished a little bit, they had some fruit trees in the backyard, they lived on subsistence. And they weren't prepared or willing to enter into an economy of production.
Father Mark finances his operation with donations from supporters in the United States to the tune of $15,000 or $20,000 a year. This is the money that built the manioc factory. Father Mark did well out of the move from old Saint-Osyr, yet even in his prime selection he was struggling to make the irrigated Sertão yield, with a subsidy which would have seemed princely to the poor farmers of the Caatinga. I was told that the making of the lake had caused the fish population to multiply. In 2 days we saw only 1 fishing boat, perhaps because an inland sea is more likely to be lashed into waves than the river ever was, and the fishermen's tiny boats cannot handle the going. It's impossible to see how the lake could be used by farmers without capital to irrigate land for cultivation. One thing the lake undoubtedly did do was to drive farmers out of their fertile riverside roças and onto the one-way track to the vast slums of Rio and Sao Paulo. For mile after mile, the slopes of the Caatinga rise empty from the shores of the lake. On the high scarps, rock crystal miners cling to a miserable living. The rest of the lake's shoreline is dead. No house, no road can be seen through the heat shimmer. At last we re-entered the channel of the Rio San Francisco. Only a fool such as I could have thought that Sobradinho Dam could control floods. In fact, it caused unprecedented, disastrous flooding in 1979, 1980 and 1981. To prevent flooding, a reservoir must be kept empty. To supply hydroelectric stations, it must be kept full. Now I thought I knew why the river was permanently swollen. It was not surprising that new concrete walls had been built around towns far above the agreed boundaries of the lake. The candy-coloured curlicues of Baja were half hidden by the flood barrier erected on its old basalt quay. Baja was built a century ago when the wealth generated by leather and sugar percolated via paternalism to the riverside towns. It was built by men like the one on the right, whose tall, well-fed body and white hat mark him as a cattle baron, a fazendero. It was another form of showing off, perhaps, but among the results are a clean tiled market for their meat, well-drained streets, and a degree of civic pride which is downright finicking. The vaquero is to the Nordeste what the cowboy is to Texas. Like the North American cowboy, he's a much romanticized figure and very aware of his own glamour. Unlike the American cowboy, he's a member of a hereditary caste established 400 years ago, living in conditions which can only be described as feudal. The vaquero's windowless mud house was built by his ancestors, but it belongs to his master, the fazendero. If he wants to put in a septic tank, the fazendero will graciously lend him the money, and the fazendero will own the tank, along with everything else, when it is finished. The vaquero takes better care of his horse and of the cattle than he does of himself or of his family, for their livelihood depends on both.
Ô, minha filha, sente que é a perna dela, pode sentar. Sente, minha filha.
As mulheres não tomam cachaça, não?
Toma.
Sim.
Quer ver?
Aqui não.
Aqui toma, quer ver?
É.
Você bebe muito, né?
Se beber muita não, já.
Que, Aninha?
Quem não tem costume vai beber, logo.
Posso provar?
Vai.
Pode.
Pode. É feito de quê? De cana-de-açúcar?
Cana-de-açúcar.
É de cana-de-açúcar, isso aí é melhor do mundo.
Quantos filhos tem em você?
10.
10?
Pra cima.
Fazer
Pra
10
cima?
filhos é trabalho pesado, não?
Ah, é.
Não pode ser mais? 16 posso?
É, 16, morreu 6.
De doenças de criança?
É.
Ah, não? As coisas são melhoradas agora, não?
Graças a Deus, né?
Sim, para as crianças que
É,
não
sim.
sofrem sem mais
É?
destas coisas.
É.
The land is too poor to support the cattle population at its present density unless the vaquero waits on the animals hand and foot. If an animal in his care should break a leg, he'll be called to account. For the middle classes of the provincial towns, the vaquero's grim reality is entertainment. Merchants and accountants like to vie with the professional rodeo riders in exhibitions involving small skill and less courage called vaquejadas. The steers are very small. They are also very tired, for they've been pushed out of the starting gate, ridden down, thrown, rounded up and delivered back to the holding corral all day long. The professionals throw them without twisting their tails, but the amateurs are clumsier. Few people notice that this doughty competitor has wrenched off the last 6 inches of the steer's tail. The ones who do laugh. There weren't too many real vaqueros at the vaquejada, but real vaqueros, like phony ones, like everyone in the Nordeste, like to show off. As the sun and the cachaça went down, the mayors of the neighbouring towns turned up to listen to improvised songs of flattery.
Agora é meu emprego que o pai morreu bêbado e eu vou no mesmo caminho. Tenha cuidado, cigano, não queira me maltratar. É rival da boiador, filho do mesmo lugar. Forçando na minha garganta, quem diz que esse besta canta, nunca viu cachorro. Você não sabe, aqui só tem repetista, tem vaqueiro, tem mulher. Tem festa, tem versador, te delégua de pé. Enganar ninguém engana quando eu morrer bebendo.
I was longing to get back to the river beyond the dust, with only the thump of the paddles and the evening bird song to break the quiet. At Ibochirama, we loaded up with wood, the precious wood of the stunted trees of the Caatinga. It's all been cut with billhooks in the bush and brought on human and muleback to the roadside to be transported to the river and then manhandled again as our crew loads it. The coolie labour is dreadfully underpaid, but even so, there's no way the people living by the river could pay what it would cost to keep the steamboats plying. There can be no doubt about it. Our paddle steamer is causing a sensation. Why do the people stare at us so? Why are we invaded by hordes of children who scream not just in delight, but in astonishment at what they see? Well, for one thing, they've not seen a paddle steamer for 3 years. For another, they know that they will never see one again. The Harness River nowadays has no wealth to bring. New towns grow up only where the highways cross it. Ibochirama is exploding at the point where the Salvador-Brasilia highway crosses the bloated stream. There are few real advantages to living by the river these days, and some considerable disadvantages. The rich river soil is not only good for manioc, corn and beans, but for breeding disease as well. In Sitio do Mato, the river provides the only water for drinking, for washing dishes, clothes and goat's entrails, and for pigs to paddle in. The boat is a clinic. It bears the insignia of the Seventh-day Adventists who finance it and supply drugs. There is a public clinic a few yards away, but the people still queue up for missionary care. The doctor, who seems to have some qualification as a dentist, likes his boat, and he likes his practice too. If he examines anyone, it's stethoscope on upper chest and blood pressure. But mostly he makes his diagnosis just on first impressions. There is, after all, a public health service, and graver matters he can report to them. He doesn't question the patients, for to do so is to unleash a Jeremiad. He simply deals with what they complain of and deals out drugs from his store.
Asma, bronquite.
I asked the doctor why he offered no information about family planning. He said it was the job of BEMFAM, the Brazilian Family Planning Association, to do that. We laughed because the head of BEMFAM is the highest paid family planning official in the world, and here in the Nordeste, no one's ever even heard of it. I asked him about infant mortality too.
Isso, nós sentimos grande índice de mortalidade de crianças, especialmente quando vêm essas epidemias como disenteria, gripe.
Você ha falado dos porcos, suas ruas. Você vai explicar a importância dos porcos para a saúde da gente?
Bom, isso seria muito importante. Inclusive, o prefeito aqui de Lapa, ele está fazendo já uma campanha para tirar toda essa coisa da rua. Animais, tanto porcos como cachorros, porque o cachorro também...
Os porcos comem os excrementos humanos, não? Sem os porcos, o que se faz?
Mas olha, aí está o sério problema, é os porcos comerem os excrementos. E esses porcos que comem, eles devolvem ao dono a verminose que eles são portadores. E isso não é o problema, porque realmente um lugar como esse não tem esgoto.
The health problems of the towns of the Nordeste will not be solved when the mayors have driven pigs and dogs off the streets. Towns without clean water or drainage or sanitation are death traps, even those in the relatively healthy environment of the Caatinga. It's market day in Masaroca, but there are few vendors to bring fresh fruit and vegetables from the riverside, and even fewer buyers. The church is locked, although it's also Sunday. Only the tavern is doing any business.
Senhor, como se usa estas roupas? Me faça ver o anador.
The shopkeeper is the only doctor.
Cibalena também? Dipirona, cloridrato. E quando se usa isto?
2 vezes, até 3 vezes.
3 vezes a mais.
He has expensive antibiotics, but no rehydration mixture, which would save the lives of children with diarrhea. People are preparing to welcome the mayor, unmindful for the present of their sufferings and unresentful of the fact that that he will do as little for them as all the mayors before him. Infant mortality in the Nordeste remains at 160 per thousand, officially. Besides the tiny graves in these no-man's lands of cemeteries, babies are often buried in unmarked graves in outback hotsas. What the Nordeste needs is development, not on the gargantuan scale of Sobradinho, but on a human scale. In 7 days and nights travelling, we've covered 600 kilometres, giving us an unimpressive average speed of slightly less than 4 kilometres an hour. We could see our next port of call for hours before we got there, the Gothic rock pinnacles of Bom Jesus da Lapa. In Brazil, any spectacular projection from a flat landscape is instantly crowned with a cross or a statue, but Bom Jesus went several better, for the caverns beneath the rock have been turned into a centre of pilgrimage. The guardians of the sanctuary are a group of Polish priests whose understanding of the Church's teaching regarding social justice is rather different from Father Mark's. The sermons from this pulpit are undeniably socialist. The priests are in close touch with the Comissão Pastoral da Terra, which seeks rather belatedly to organize the peasantry in defense of their rights. Today is the Dia do Trabalhador, the 1st of May. Father Tadeusz watches over the meeting, but makes no attempt to direct its course.
Para melhorar a vida do trabalhador, que venha mudanças sociais, para melhorar a sua condição de vida, tem que partir antes de tudo de uma decisão política. É na hora que o povo compreender essa situação, eleger, voltar, que muito defende o grande capital.
This young man is the lawyer representing the family of a small farmer who has been shot dead by employees of the fazendeiro in front of witnesses because, after years of harassment, he refused to abandon his roça. The police inquiry has been inconclusive.
E o que nos resta? O que resta aos sindicatos? O que resta a esses diretores? É preciso...
Whatever this meeting is, it's not evidence of the mass mobilization of the peasantry under the protection of the Church.
Da diretoria dos sindicatos.
Most of the audience is too old to put up much of a fight, or too young, being schoolgirls roped in to swell the attendance. As the church workers know only too well, the infrastructure for effective organization is lacking. There are no roads, no telephones, no cheap forms of transport to bring the scattered farmers together. Instead, there's electricity to bring them the soap operas of TV Global. The church might well look healthy in Bom Jesus da Lapa, where it is the principal meal ticket for a population living on religious tourism. But even there's no lack of evidence of a religion which has less to do with democracy and social justice than with mysticism and magic.
Glória para sempre,
The priests dismiss this kind of thing as superstition. Rather, it's one way to give shape and meaning to a life which must often seem absurdly cruel.
Que é?
Preto velho.
É preto velho que
É
é.
preto velho, é preto velho da Saromba. É preto velho o nome dele.
É devoto, você de preto velho? Que é mesmo esta roça?
É.
Esta guia branca de que é?
Essa daí é de Rainha do Mar.
The state of Bahia is famous in all Brazil for its voodoo practices, known in these parts as macumba or candomblé.
Olha, meu marido está com outra mulher. Que é possível fazer por este?
Tá com outra?
Ah, sim, para atração do meu marido.
Aí, tem bom aí é banho, pô.
Faz ver, faz ver.
Candomblé is the religion of permanent crisis, of irrational hope against hope. The paraphernalia of candomblé shades imperceptibly into native medicine, an improvised religion to go with improvised healthcare for people who feel they have no other resource. Things on the river are going from bad to worse. The São Francisco's inner workings have opened up so many leaks that it takes whole forests to get up a head of steam. We've acquired a barge heaped with wood which travels alongside, reducing our snail's pace even further. All night long the sailors keep leaping in and out of it, flinging tree after tree into the boiler. The noise is fantastic. The danger of the whole caboodle blowing up means that the engineers must rush about opening valves in all directions, adding blaring and clanging and hissing to the general cacophony. Sleep is impossible at any time of day or night. Whatever they do, we can manage very little more than about 3 knots flat out. It was only a matter of time before we caught fire. The miracle is that we haven't burnt to the waterline days ago. Our gallant captain takes it in his stride. Needless to say, the firefighting equipment doesn't work. I wonder if the crew will be in work once the old Gaiola collapses into dock here in Pirapora. They primp to greet their public, heroes for the nonce. Tomorrow is another day. By now we're travelling so slowly that a toddler could outpace us. As we crept along, we gathered an entourage like train bearers attending a dowager. The crowd waited reverently.
Vai chegar pra cá. Chega pra cá.
Beleza mesmo?
Our steward shows us his beautiful daughters with obvious pride. The old Gaiola will no longer serve the people of the valley of the São Francisco. Like the Cajancas, she will become a parody of herself, taking tourists on day trips. The tourists will never know the difference. The federal government has just announced Plan VAST, an attempt to coordinate all the authorities with jurisdiction over any part of the Valley do Rio São Francisco. There will be many meetings, much clashing of acronyms, and no conclusions. The people of the river will follow the general drift to the faveladas of the big cities. Perhaps this film can stand as a monument to their dignity, their toughness, their gentleness, and their bewildering optimism.